Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maaike. Today I have my March wrap up for you. And in terms of quantity, I did okay, but a lot of the books I read were short. I finished 5 books in total. I didn't finish my audiobook, which is a bit of a shame. I think I listened to only 3 hours of it. Usually I can get through an audiobook in a month. I don't listen to my audiobooks on like a higher speed. I just listen to it at the speed that it was read, because I want to enjoy the story and not like race through it for the sake of finishing it up super quickly. I'm liking this one again. It's another Sydney Grice and story in the Gower Street Detective series, but I'm still in the midst of it. There isn't even anything too special going on just yet. There was a murder, and we're now investigating the murder. That's it. Still very much at the start of that story. And of the 5 books that I did read, there's one that's missing from my stack because I passed it on to my mom. So if you saw my book haul, then you know that I got some books during Dutch Book Weeks. And during Dutch Book Week, there was an essay that was written by Ozcan Akyol, and I already read that. And I passed it on to her because she wanted to read it too. So I don't have it here, but I did read it and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely sort of an essay that definitely sort of stirred up a little bit of, well, let's just say a lot of critique, as well as comments from a lot of people, because it really critiques a lot of the goings on in Dutch literature and book publishing and how people can be a bit snobs about what people should read and when are you a real author and those kind of things. So he was also very well aware, and you know, a lot of people were saying, yeah, but he's an author too, so he's sort of, you know, kicking down his own door. And the thing is that if you actually read the thing, then he's very well aware that the piece he wrote can seem a bit hypocritical because he's an author too and he's part of the system, and he's well aware of it. But he does also explain what he tries to do to beat the system and to try and make it work, and that people should just be less hung up about reading proper books and what is literature and those kind of things, and that reading, in order to combat fewer people reading, because book sales have been going down in the Netherlands for quite some time, that we should teach people to enjoy reading, so that it doesn't matter what you read, as long as you read and you enjoy yourself, that's the most important part. So I really got on board with that message. That's also the message that I send to my students whenever they go like, Maaike, if I want to work on my English and I want to read, what should I read? I'm like, well, don't read Shakespeare, even though that's great, but if that's not your cup of tea, don't read it. Find what you like and start from there. That's what I say. And of course, a lot of my students aren't even readers sometimes, so they don't know what they like. And I was like, you know, you just got to try some things. Go to a bookstore, go to a library, read blurbs, find something that sparks your interest, and then you just need to stick to it. And that's pretty much the message that he sends to in that book. So I was very much on board with it and very much agreeing with it. So that for me was a great read. It was very short though. It was only like 60 or 70 pages. And that was also the case for some of the other books I read. So I also read this one finally. It finally came in the mail. So this is Rutger Bregman, Het Water Komt. And this is sort of like a pamphlet, essay kind of thing about, well, that the Netherlands should worry about not drowning in the next couple of decades. We had a huge flood in the 1950s, and this story sort of starts there and says, well, this could happen again if we don't do anything about climate change and sort of making sure the temperature doesn't rise any further, or if we don't manage things well. So it's a very interesting one. I'm not entirely sure whether I'm fully on board with this one, but it's okay, I guess. Everyone in the Netherlands could order this one for free, by the way. So that was another free book. And I read another free book, namely this one, Leon and Juliette by Annejet van der Zijl. This is a story. It's a non-fiction story that's going to be published as a larger book. So this is sort of like a taster of the book that is yet to come. And this tells the story of a Dutchman who grows up near The Hague, and he's the youngest of 3 sons, and both of his other brothers are doing serious careers, and the family needs to make some money, so he leaves for the US to make money there, to be a businessman. They have a couple of connections. That's how he gets into the country in the early 18th century, and he ends up in Charleston. And Charleston is a city where slavery and the slave trade is big and booming, even though more and more people around the globe are saying, should we be doing this? After he arrives, he falls ill, and the household that he's staying in has slaves. And one of the girls there nurses him back to health, so he doesn't die, and they fall in love. And they decide against all odds to go for this lifestyle where they have to hide because you can't be together, and those were the laws of the time. They have to hide their children, the whole 9 yards. In the end, it's a very tragic story as well, but it's also a very hopeful story about love and about friendship and about kinship and about going for what you believe in. And I think it's a good thing that she found this story, because this family is pretty much forgotten. The house they used to live in has been demolished. Like, there's very few traces of these people in history, but she's tried to track everything down and see who they are and what their lives were like. And this book gives you a taster of that. I think the bigger book is supposed to launch this fall. Not sure whether I will read this, but this was a really good one. I think a very important story to tell, because it gives you the background of how harrowing the times were if you were not white in Charleston in the early 18th century. Is it 18th or 19th? I think it was 19th century. I keep saying 18th century. It's the 1800s, so that's the 19th century. Yeah, all the things that are going on there. So this is a very important story, I think, to tell. This book I already showed you in my wrap-up last month, because I was just, I was in the midst of it. It was a book I couldn't finish in February. It's very short. This is Graham Greene's The Third Man. And I ended up finishing it. I'm not someone who DNFs books all that quickly. It's another short one, and I didn't really know anything about this. But when I read it, it turns out that this is a story he wrote to turn into a movie script for the movie by the same name. And this is, if you read the blurb on the back, it seems to be a super exciting story about ooh, some mystery is going on. Was this person killed or not? But in the end, it didn't grab me. And so I got to a point in the story, which is where I left off in February, that I thought was, now it's going to pick up. And then I kept reading. It was just people talking all the time. So this didn't really bring me what I thought it was going to give me. So that's a bit of a shame. But it was entertaining enough. It wasn't a bad book. It's not badly written, even though it's backstory to a movie. It's not bad. It's actually, because I think it's supposed to be a movie, it's just a lot of dialogue. And you don't really get a lot of background to characters or anything like that, because of course the images in the movie would do the rest. So I feel that this story is just, it's 2/3 of what an actual novel would be like. That's sort of how I felt. There's too little to really get stuck into. So I was very happy once all of the books that I showed you in my book haul arrived, that this one was now in there. I found out that the 3 books I was reading in the Jacoby series was actually continued into a 4th book. This is the final book in that series, I think. If you read this book, then there is sort of an opening to keep the series going, but I don't think the author did that, because when was this published? This was published 3 years ago, so I don't think, if there's not a new book in the series by now, I'm pretty sure there isn't another one. This is the 4th and final book in the Jacoby series called The Dire King. I can't say too much about this series if you want to know more. I can tell you a little bit about the premise of the first one. In the first one, we meet Abigail Rook as she just set foot in New England in a town called New Fiddleham, and she needs shelter and she needs a job, and that's how she meets Mr. Jacoby. And Mr. Jacoby is a seer. He can see auras and things like that, and he's a private investigator for everything weird. And the story, at first, it really feels like each book has its own story almost, but in this one it sort of ties everything together. So there is an overarching storyline that you sort of need to know in order to be able to understand every single book, in order to be able to read this one. It all sort of comes together as some of the characters that are introduced in the second book are in this. In the third book, we find out a little bit more about one of the major characters that is also in this one. And it's about fairies. It's about different beings, goblins, dragons, everything sort of passes by. And at the same time, it's set in 19th century New England, and it's investigators and a lot of like, it's sort of like urban fantasy, but set in a historical setting, you could say. I really liked it. I like the characters in this. I do have to say that a lot of the things that were happening in this book, I sort of saw coming. And I felt that a lot of the wrapping, like the things in the end, how it wraps up, is quite convenient for the story. It's, yeah, let's just keep it at that. And I also felt that when the book, like in the last half, there is a battle going on, which you kind of know is coming. But instead of getting the battle and how that goes, our main characters that we follow around most are sort of flitting back and forth between worlds. And they are away from what I feel is like the main action. So I feel that this book could have been more interesting, but it was super entertaining. I still loved it. I think that as a final book in the series, it does what it had to do. So I don't think it's a bad one. I don't think it's a bad way of wrapping up the story. Not at all. I really enjoyed it. I just felt that there were a couple of things that were predictable, and I would have liked to see more from the battlefield scenes. Like, that was just it. That's what I would have liked this book would have done. So yeah, this is, I really liked the series, and if you are still looking for a good sort of, it's marketed as YA, but I don't feel it's super YA, especially not the first three. Like, this is probably the most YA of them all. But it's published by a YA publishing house. So I take it it's then supposed to be a YA story. But I think this is just a really good series if you like fantasy, if you like things like fairies and detectives and things like that, and you're looking for a book that can take you from YA reading to adult reading. Because I think that this has a lot of like parallels with both. So I feel it sort of sits in between. So I think that this can be a good series if you like to read YA fantasy and you're not yet ready to go into adult fantasy, then this is a good series I think that you can read to sort of bridge the gap. So that's definitely one I can recommend. So those are the 5 books that I read. They weren't very long books, so I'm hoping to remedy that in April. I do have to say that March was, of course, a crazy month for everyone, I think. So that also meant that I didn't really have the headspace to be reading a lot. I definitely had to experience, like, I'm a teacher, so I'm now doing everything online. And that's just about twice as exhausting as it is when you're actually in a classroom. So at the end of the day, I also just want to give my eyes rest. And reading a book is just not something that really pops into my system then. So yeah, I already have my next book lined up for April, which I hope to be able to start today. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We have hopefully another month of reading ahead of us. According to Goodreads, I'm now 1 book ahead of schedule, which I think is weird because really, how much did I actually read? But oh well. So yeah, that's it for me for today. Thank you very much for watching my wrap up, and then I hope to see you in my next video, which will go live in a week time. Bye.